Malik Cole had exactly 4 minutes to reach conference room 4B, and the stack of reports in his arms rose so high it nearly blocked his view of the hallway ahead. 8 years of single fatherhood had taught him to move fast, to anticipate problems before they materialized, to survive on margins thinner than most people could imagine. But nothing in those 8 years had prepared him for the chaos of this particular Tuesday morning at Harlow Innovations. He worked in data processing, a position that placed him near the bottom of the corporate hierarchy, invisible to most executives and senior staff. The security guards at the front desk always seemed to study his badge a little longer than necessary. His colleagues sometimes spoke about him in the third person while he sat 3 feet away. Every mistake he made carried weight that others never had to bear, examined under a microscope reserved specifically for people who looked like him. The pressure of the deadline pushed against his chest as he rushed down the corridor, the fluorescent lights humming overhead like witnesses to his urgency. He could feel eyes on his back, that familiar sensation of being watched and measured against standards that shifted depending on who was doing the measuring. Room 4B should have been the third door on the left. He grabbed the handle without checking the nameplate, twisted it open, and stepped inside. Vivien Harlow stood in the center of the room, her silk blouse half-buttoned, fingers frozen mid-motion on the fabric. The CEO of one of Atlanta's most influential tech companies, a woman whose pale skin and sharp blue eyes had graced the covers of business magazines, caught in a moment of vulnerability by a man who processed her company's data reports 3 floors below her office. Time suspended itself in that fraction of a second. Malik's brain registered the scene in fragments. The expensive furniture, the floor-to-ceiling windows, the woman whose signature appeared on his paychecks, staring at him with an expression he could not read. His hands went slack. Reports cascaded to the floor in a waterfall of white paper, scattering across the polished hardwood like evidence of his catastrophic error. "I'm sorry," he stammered, the words tumbling out faster than his thoughts could organize them. "I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I thought this was 4B. I'm sorry, He did not wait for her response. He fled, leaving the documents where they had fallen, his heart pounding against his ribs with the force of a verdict already delivered. Because Malik Cole understood something that people who had never lived in his skin could not fully grasp. For a black man in corporate America, a small mistake could metastasize into something career-ending with terrifying speed. One wrong door could become harassment. One accident could become assault. One moment of confusion could become the story that followed him for the rest of his professional life. The next 3 days stretched like rubber bands pulled to their breaking point. Malik moved through Harlow Innovations like a ghost, trying not to disturb the living, keeping his head down, his voice soft, his presence as minimal as humanly possible. He arrived early and left late, taking the stairs instead of the elevator to minimize his chances of encountering anyone who might have heard what happened. But whispers traveled through office buildings faster than email. They gathered in break rooms and clustered around water coolers, growing louder each time they passed from one mouth to another. Malik caught fragments of conversations that stopped abruptly when he approached. He saw the sidelong glances that followed him down hallways. He felt the temperature change when he entered a room. "Did you hear what happened with the CEO?" someone asked in the kitchen, their voice carrying just far enough for Malik to catch the words before they noticed him standing by the coffee machine. The conversation died instantly, replaced by an awkward silence that spoke louder than any accusation. "That guy from data processing," another voice said in the elevator lobby, not realizing Malik was waiting around the corner. "Walked right in on her. Can you imagine the nerve?" Nerve landed differently when applied to him. It carried implications that had nothing to do with courage and everything to do with assumptions about who he was and what he was capable of. Malik had spent his entire career navigating these waters, learning to read the currents of bias that flowed beneath the surface of professional politeness. He knew how quickly a misunderstanding could become a confirmation of someone's worst expectations. At night, he lay awake in his small apartment while Lily slept in the room next door, staring at the ceiling and calculating the mathematics of disaster if he lost this job. He had perhaps 6 weeks of savings before the bills would start piling up. Lily's school had a field trip coming up that required a permission slip and $45, which he had already budgeted from his next paycheck. His mother's birthday was in 3 weeks, and he had promised to take her to that restaurant she loved. The one with the jazz band on Saturday nights. The dominoes of his life stood in careful formation, each one dependent on the others remaining upright. One push from the wrong direction, and everything would fall. He thought about calling in sick, about buying himself a few more days before the inevitable confrontation, but absence would only make things worse, would only give the rumors more room to grow into something monstrous. So he showed up each morning with his stomach in knots, performed his duties with mechanical precision, and waited for the axe to fall. On the 3rd day, it finally did. The executive assistant appeared at his desk like an apparition, her heels clicking against the floor with a rhythm that sounded like a countdown. Malik looked up from his computer screen and knew immediately that the moment he had been dreading had arrived. Her face was professionally neutral, revealing nothing about what awaited him on the floor above. "Miss Harlow would like to see you in her office," she said, her voice carrying just far enough for the colleagues at nearby desks to hear. "Now, please." A ripple of quiet anticipation spread outward through the open floor plan. Malik felt the weight of every pair of eyes turning toward him, felt the collective intake of breath from people who had been waiting for this exact moment. Someone at a desk near the window made a sound that might have been a cough, but sounded suspiciously like a laugh. "That's it for him," a voice muttered as Malik rose from his chair, just loud enough to reach his ears. He should have known better. He walked toward the elevator with his spine straight and his expression carefully blank, refusing to give anyone the satisfaction of seeing his fear. The ride to the top floor lasted approximately 45 seconds, but felt like a journey to another dimension, one where the rules he had learned to navigate no longer applied. The executive suite occupied the entire top floor of the building, all glass walls and modern furniture and art pieces that probably cost more than his annual salary. Malik had never been up here before, had never had reason to exist in this rarefied atmosphere where decisions were made that affected hundreds of lives. He felt conspicuously out of place, aware of every scuff on his shoes, every wrinkle in his shirt, every marker of the distance between his world and this one. The assistant led him to a door at the end of a long hallway and knocked twice before opening it. "Mr. Cole is here," she announced, then stepped aside to let him enter. Vivien Harlow sat behind a desk that looked like it had been carved from a single piece of reclaimed wood, her hands folded in front of her, her expression unreadable. She was younger than Malik had expected, probably in her mid-30s, with auburn hair pulled back in an elegant twist and pale skin that seemed almost luminous in the afternoon light filtering through the windows. In the 3 years he had worked at Harlow Innovations, he had only ever seen her from a distance, a figure glimpsed in hallways or pictured in company newsletters. Up close, she possessed a presence that filled the room without overwhelming it. "Please," she said, gesturing to the chair across from her desk. "Sit down." Malik lowered himself into the seat, his muscles tense, his mind racing through possible responses to whatever accusation was coming. He had rehearsed apologies in his head for 3 days, had crafted explanations and pleas for understanding that he hoped would at least buy him time to find another job before being terminated. "I imagine you've been expecting this conversation," Vivien said. And something in her tone made Malik look up, searching her face for the anger he had anticipated finding there. It was not there. "I want to start by saying that what happened on Tuesday was clearly an accident," she continued, her voice calm and measured. "The conference room assignments were changed at the last minute and no one updated the directory. You were exactly where you were supposed to be, even if it turned out to be the wrong place. Malik blinked, processing her words through the filter of his expectations. I'm not being fired. No. The word landed like a stone dropped into still water, sending ripples through everything Malik had assumed about this moment. You're not being fired. In fact, I called you up here for an entirely different reason. She reached into a drawer and pulled out a folder that Malik recognized immediately. It was his proposal for restructuring the company's data management protocols, the one he had submitted through the suggestion system 6 weeks ago and assumed had been ignored like every other idea that emerged from the lower floors of the corporate hierarchy. I've been reading this, Vivien said, placing the folder on the desk between them. Your proposal for implementing machine learning algorithms to optimize our data processing workflow. It's impressive. You read that? The words escaped before Malik could stop them, carrying with them all the surprise of someone who had grown accustomed to being overlooked. I read everything that comes through the suggestion system, she replied. Most of it is complaints about the coffee machines or requests for better parking, but occasionally something comes through that makes me pay attention. She tapped the folder with one finger. This made me pay attention. Malik sat in stunned silence as Vivien explained what she had in mind. A pilot project to test his proposed algorithms on a subset of the company's data infrastructure. A small team that he would lead, with resources allocated from the innovation budget. A chance to prove that his ideas had value beyond the spreadsheets he processed every day. I don't understand, he finally said. Because the gap between what he had expected and what was being offered felt too vast to bridge without questioning. Why me? There are people with more experience, more credentials, more willingness to maintain the status quo. Vivien finished for him. More investment in doing things the way they've always been done. She leaned back in her chair, studying him with those sharp blue eyes that seemed to see more than he was comfortable revealing. I didn't build this company by hiring people who thought like everyone else. I built it by finding people who saw problems others couldn't see and solutions others wouldn't consider. She stood and walked to the window, looking out at the Atlanta skyline spreading beneath them. My father started this company in a garage 30 years ago. Everyone told him he was crazy, that the market was too saturated, that he didn't have the connections to compete with the established players. He proved them wrong by being better than everyone who underestimated him. She turned back to face Malik. I'm not interested in underestimating anyone. Are you interested in showing me what you can do? For a moment. Malik could not speak. The weight of the question pressed against the accumulated weight of every assumption that had ever been made about his capabilities, every opportunity that had been closed to him, every time he had been passed over or overlooked or dismissed. He thought about Lily waiting for him at home, about the promises he had made to her and to himself about what their lives could become. Yes, he said, and the word felt like a door opening. Yes, I'm interested. The changes began gradually, so subtle at first that Malik almost did not notice them. Vivien started appearing at his desk in the data processing department, asking questions about his project, offering suggestions, treating his opinions as if they carried weight. The first time it happened, the entire floor went silent, watching the CEO of the company engage in earnest conversation with a man most of them had barely acknowledged existed. The whispers shifted in character, but did not disappear. Malik heard them in the break room, in the bathroom, in the spaces between cubicles where people thought their voices would not carry. Why is she so interested in him all of a sudden, someone asked. The question loaded with implications that extended beyond simple curiosity. You know how these things work? Another voice responded, lowering conspiratorially. Diversity optics makes the company look good. Malik tried to ignore the comments, focusing instead on the work that Vivien had entrusted to him. But the assumptions followed him like shadows. darkening every interaction and poisoning every success. When the pilot project showed promising results, there were those who attributed it to favoritism rather than competence. When Vivien praised his work in a company meeting, there were those who exchanged knowing glances that suggested something unseemly beneath the surface. It was exhausting, carrying the double burden of proving his worth while simultaneously defending against accusations that his worth was not really his own. But Vivien seemed oblivious to the undercurrent swirling around them. Or perhaps she simply refused to acknowledge them. She continued to seek out Malik's expertise, to value his contributions, to treat him with a respect that felt almost revolutionary in its straightforwardness. One afternoon, she stopped by his desk just as he was reviewing the latest batch of test results. "These numbers are excellent," she said, scanning the data on his screen. "Better than I expected at this stage. The algorithm needed some adjustment to account for seasonal variations," Malik explained, pointing to a specific column. "Once we factored that in, the efficiency gains really started to compound." Vivien nodded, her expression thoughtful. "You have a gift for seeing patterns others miss. How did you develop that?" The question caught Malik off guard. No one in his professional life had ever asked about the origins of his skills, had ever expressed curiosity about the person behind the productivity metrics. "I learned to pay attention," he said finally. "When you're used to being watched, you start watching back. You notice things other people take for granted." Something shifted in Vivien's expression, a flicker of recognition that suggested his words had landed somewhere deeper than he intended. Before she could respond, Malik's phone rang with the specific tone he had assigned to Lily's school. He glanced at the screen, then at Vivien, caught between the demands of his work and the responsibilities that always came first. "I'm sorry," he said. "I need to take this." He answered the call and heard Lily's voice, thick with tears and fear. "Daddy, school got out early today and nobody came to get me. I'm waiting by the front door, but everyone else is gone and I don't know what to do." Malik's heart clenched. The schedule change had been announced in an email he had clearly missed while drowning in project data. His mother, who usually served as backup for situations exactly like this, was at a doctor's appointment across town. He looked at the clock on his wall and calculated the time it would take to get to Lily's school using public transportation, factoring in the walk to the bus stop and the transfers required. Too long. Far too long for a 7-year-old standing alone outside an empty building. "It's okay, baby," he said, keeping his voice calm despite the panic rising in his chest. "I'm coming to get you right now. Can you wait inside the office if it's still open?" "I think so." Lily sniffled. "But hurry." "Daddy, I'm scared." Malik ended the call and stood, already gathering his things. "I'm sorry," he said to Vivien, the words tumbling out with an urgency that probably seemed disproportionate to a simple early dismissal. "My daughter. Her school let out early, and I didn't. I have to go. I'm sorry. I know we have the review meeting in an hour, but where's her school?" Vivien interrupted. "Westside Elementary. It's about 40 minutes by bus, but if I run, I'll drive you." Malik stopped mid-motion, certain he had misheard. "What, my car is in the garage downstairs. It'll take 15 minutes, maybe less if traffic cooperates." Vivien was already moving toward the door, her keys appearing in her hand as if conjured by necessity. "Come on, your daughter is waiting." The drive to Westside Elementary passed in a blur of Atlanta streets in stunned silence. Malik sat in the passenger seat of Vivien's car, an electric vehicle that probably cost more than he made in 2 years. Watching the city slide past the window and trying to process what was happening. The CEO of his company was driving him to pick up his daughter from school, navigating traffic with the same decisive efficiency she brought to board meetings. "You don't have to do this," he said finally, the words inadequate to express the magnitude of his gratitude and confusion. I know, Vivien replied simply. But you needed help, and I could help. Sometimes it really is that straightforward. They arrived at the school to find Lily sitting on a bench just inside the front entrance, her small backpack clutched to her chest like a shield. Her dark skin was streaked with tears, her thick, curly hair escaping from the braids Malik had carefully plaited that morning. When she saw her father push through the doors, she launched herself toward him with a force that nearly knocked him backward, her arms wrapping around his waist with desperate relief. "I was so scared," she whispered into his shirt. "I thought something happened to you." "I'm right here," Malik murmured, holding her close. "I'm always going to come for you, baby. Always." He felt Vivien's presence behind him and turned to see her watching them with an expression he could not quite identify. It was softer than anything he had seen from her in the office, touched with something that might have been longing or memory or simple human recognition. "Lily," he said, "this is Miss Harlow. She's my boss, and she gave me a ride so I could get here faster." Lily studied Vivien with the unfiltered curiosity of childhood, her brown eyes taking in the woman's pale skin and auburn hair with frank interest. "Thank you for bringing my daddy," she said. "He worries about me a lot." "I can see why," Vivien replied, crouching down to Lily's level. "He has a pretty special person to worry about." Lily's face brightened with a smile that transformed her tear-stained features. "Do you want to see my drawing? I made it in art class today." Before Malik could intervene, Lily had unzipped her backpack and pulled out a piece of paper covered in crayon marks. She held it up for Vivien to inspect, launching into an elaborate explanation of the various elements depicted: a house, a tree, a sun with a smiling face, and two figures standing in front of it all. "That's me and Daddy," Lily explained, pointing to the figures. "We're in our new house, the one we're going to have someday when Daddy gets promoted." Something sharp and tender twisted in Malik's chest. He had talked to Lily about his hopes for the future, about the possibility of moving to a bigger place with a yard where she could play. He had not realized how carefully she had been listening, or how vividly she had translated his words into images. Vivien examined the drawing with the same intensity she brought to financial reports. "This is beautiful work," she said. "I especially like the flowers you put around the house." "Those are for my grandma," Lily said. "Daddy says when we get our new house, she can come live with us and have her own garden." Malik watched Vivien interact with his daughter, watched the CEO of a multi-million-dollar company crouch on a school lobby floor and discuss the artistic merits of a 7-year-old's crayon drawing. There was nothing performative about it. No sense that she was simply going through the motions to please an employee. She was genuinely engaged, genuinely interested, genuinely present in a way that most adults failed to be with children. By the time they returned to Vivien's car, Lily was chattering away about her school day, her teachers, her best friend Marcus, who had lost a tooth during lunch. She had apparently decided that Vivien was worthy of her full confidence, sharing stories and opinions with the enthusiasm of someone who had found an unexpected ally. Vivien listened to everything, asking questions that demonstrated she was actually paying attention, laughing at the funny parts and expressing appropriate sympathy for the unfair parts. Malik watched her through the rearview mirror, seeing her through his daughter's eyes. Not a CEO, not a boss, just a woman who had shown up when they needed help. When they pulled up in front of Malik's apartment building, Lily surprised everyone by throwing her arms around Vivien in an impulsive hug. "Thank you for the ride," she said. "You should come have dinner with us sometime. Daddy makes really good spaghetti." Malik felt his face warm with embarrassment, but Vivien just smiled. "I'd like that," she said. And somehow Malik believed she meant it. The spaghetti dinner happened 3 weeks later after Lily had asked about Miss Vivien so many times that Malik finally relented and extended an invitation he never expected to be accepted. But Vivien showed up at his door at 6 o'clock on a Saturday evening carrying a bottle of wine and a chocolate cake from the bakery 2 blocks away. Lily mentioned she likes chocolate, Vivien explained when Malik stared at the cake in bewilderment. I hope that's still accurate. His apartment had never felt smaller than it did with Vivien Harlow standing in the middle of it, her presence highlighting every worn corner and budget-conscious decision. The furniture was second-hand but clean, the decorations sparse but thoughtful, the overall effect one of dignity maintained against difficult odds. Malik watched her take it all in and braced himself for the judgment that usually followed when people from different economic worlds encountered each other's realities. But Vivien's attention immediately focused on the drawings covering the refrigerator door. Lily's artwork pinned up with magnets shaped like letters and animals. She's really talented, Vivien said, studying a crayon rendering of what appeared to be a dragon flying over a city. Does she take art classes? Not formally, Malik admitted. I've been saving up for them. There's a program at the community center that starts in the fall. Lily appeared from her bedroom, dressed in what she called her fancy clothes, a purple dress with sparkles that her grandmother had given her for her birthday. She immediately commandeered Vivien, giving her a tour of the apartment that included detailed explanations of every item Lily considered interesting or important. Malik stood in the kitchen, preparing the spaghetti he had promised, listening to his daughter's voice weave through the small rooms of their home. He heard Vivien asking questions, heard Lily's animated responses, heard something that sounded remarkably like joy echoing off the walls of a space that had seen too little of it. Dinner was chaotic in the best possible way. Lily talked with her mouth full and forgot to use her napkin and knocked over her glass of juice. All the normal catastrophes of dining with a 7-year-old. Vivien handled it all with grace, helping clean up the spill, engaging with Lily's endless stream of questions, treating the modest meal as if it were a feast worthy of her full attention. After dinner, Lily insisted on showing Vivien her room, which meant Malik found himself washing dishes alone in the kitchen, listening to muffled giggles seeping under the closed door. When Vivien finally emerged, her expression had shifted into something contemplative, almost wistful. She asked me if I have kids, Vivien said, joining Malik by the sink and picking up a dish towel without being asked. I told her no. She said that was sad because I seemed like I would be a good mom. Lily has opinions about everything, Malik said, embarrassed on his daughter's behalf. I'm sorry if she... Don't be sorry. Vivien began drying the dishes Malik had washed, the domestic rhythm establishing itself with surprising naturalness. She was right. I always thought I would have children by now. The company just kept growing and time kept passing, and somehow I woke up at 34 with a corner office and no one waiting for me at home. She said it matter-of-factly, without self-pity or expectation of comfort. But Malik heard the loneliness beneath the words, recognized it as a cousin of his own. Different circumstances, different pressures, but the same fundamental ache of carrying life's weight alone. Lily's mother left when she was 6 months old, he found himself saying, the admission emerging from somewhere he usually kept locked. Said she wasn't ready to be a parent, wasn't sure she ever would be. I haven't heard from her since. I'm sorry, Vivien said. I'm not. The words surprised him with their honesty. It's hard raising her alone, harder than I ever imagined. But she's the best thing that ever happened to me, and I would rather have her all to myself than share her with someone who didn't want to be there. Vivien was quiet for a moment, her hands still moving through the motions of drying dishes. You're a good father, she said finally. I can see it in the way she looks at you, like you're her whole world. She's mine. Malik replied simply, and the weight of those 2 words filled the small kitchen like a prayer. After that evening, the boundaries between professional and personal began to blur in ways that felt dangerous and inevitable. Vivien started joining Malik to pick up Lily from school on days when her schedule allowed, the 3 of them forming a strange little caravan through the Atlanta traffic. They ate lunch together at the office, Conversations that ranged from algorithm optimization to Lily's latest art project to childhood memories shared over sandwiches in the break room. The whispers continued, but they seemed to matter less now. Malik had stopped trying to interpret every glance and comment, had stopped calculating how each interaction might be perceived by people who had already made up their minds about him. What mattered was the work he was doing, the daughter he was raising, and the unexpected connection growing between himself and a woman who existed in a world entirely different from his own. One evening, after a particularly long day of meetings and presentations, Vivien drove Malik home and accepted his offer to come inside for coffee. Lily was at her grandmother's house for the weekend, which meant the apartment was quieter than usual, the absence of her energy leaving a vacuum that felt both peaceful and melancholy. They sat on Malik's small balcony, watching the sun descend toward the Atlanta skyline, cups of coffee cooling in their hands. The city spread out beneath them like a map of possibilities, lights beginning to flicker on as darkness gathered at the edges of the sky. "Can I ask you something?" Vivien said, her voice soft against the ambient noise of the evening. "Of course. That first day when I told you about the pilot project. You looked surprised, almost suspicious." She turned to face him, her blue eyes curious rather than accusatory. "Why?" Malik considered the question, weighing how much truth to offer. In the end, he decided she deserved all of it. "Because in my experience, good things don't happen to people who look like me without a cost attached," he said. "When a black man suddenly gets attention from the people in charge, it usually means something's about to go wrong. Either you're being set up to fail, or you're being used as a token to prove a point, or there's some angle you can't see until it's too late." Vivien absorbed his words in silence, her face unreadable in the fading light. "I've spent my whole career keeping my head down," Malik continued, "doing my job well enough to keep it, but not so well that I become a threat, learning to read the temperature of every room I enter, calculating how to make myself small enough that people forget I'm there. It's exhausting, but it's the price of survival in spaces that weren't built for people like me." "I had no idea," Vivien said quietly. "I mean, I knew intellectually that things were different for that. The workplace isn't always—" She paused, frustration flickering across her features. "I sound like an idiot." "You don't," Malik said. "You sound like someone who's never had to think about it. That's not the same thing. But I should have thought about it." She set down her coffee cup with more force than necessary. "I'm the CEO. I'm supposed to see these things, supposed to create an environment where everyone can succeed regardless of what they look like. And here I am, completely oblivious to what you've been dealing with every single day in my own company." Malik watched her struggle with this realization, watched her grapple with the gap between the world she thought she had created and the one that actually existed. It would have been easy to comfort her, to smooth over the discomfort with reassurances that it wasn't her fault, that she couldn't be expected to know everything. But that kind of comfort would have been a lie. And Malik was tired of lies. "The security guard at the front desk," he said instead. "The one with the gray hair. He stopped me 3 times in my first month, asked to see my badge, even though I was wearing it around my neck, said I didn't look like I belonged here." Vivien's expression hardened. "Last year, someone reported me to HR for being aggressive during a meeting. All I did was disagree with a proposal. The complaint was dismissed, but it's still in my file somewhere, and every time I walk into a room carrying my laptop, I can feel people wondering if I stole it." The words kept coming, 8 years of accumulated indignities pouring out like water from a cracked dam. He told her about the microaggressions and the outright discrimination, about the promotions that went to less qualified colleagues and the opportunities that evaporated the moment he walked into the interview room. He told her about the exhaustion of constantly proving himself, of being exceptional just to be considered adequate. Vivien listened without interrupting, her face growing paler with each revelation, when he finally ran out of words. She sat in silence for a long moment, staring out at the city lights as if seeing them for the first time. "I'm sorry," she said finally. "Not just for what you've experienced, but for being part of a system that allowed it to happen. For not seeing what was right in front of me." "You're seeing it now," Malik said. "That's what matters. Is it enough?" The question came out raw, vulnerable in a way he had never heard from her before. Can it ever be enough? Malik thought about his daughter sleeping peacefully at her grandmother's house, dreaming of gardens and new houses and a future brighter than the present. He thought about the proposal that had changed his life, the door he had opened by accident, the woman sitting beside him who had chosen to see him when so many others had chosen not to. "I don't know," he admitted, "but I think it's a start." The sunset painted the sky in shades of orange and purple as they sat in comfortable silence, the weight of the conversation settling around them like a blanket. Malik could not remember the last time he had been this honest with anyone outside his family, the last time he had allowed someone to see the wounds he usually kept hidden. "That door you opened by accident," Vivien said finally, a hint of a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "I've been thinking about it a lot lately, about how the wrong door sometimes leads to the right place." Malik turned to look at her, seeing not the CEO who signed his paychecks, but the woman who had driven his daughter home from school, who had praised her crayon drawings, who had washed dishes in his kitchen while confessing her own loneliness. "Maybe," he said, "we should stop thinking of it as wrong." The moment stretched between them like a bridge being built in real time, each second adding another plank to a structure neither had planned to construct. Vivien's eyes searched his face, looking for permission or resistance, finding something that must have encouraged her because she leaned closer, close enough that Malik could see the reflection of the dying sunlight in her blue eyes. "What if we opened a few more doors?" she asked. "Together, on purpose this time." The weight of the question settled over Malik like a blanket, warm and terrifying in equal measure. He thought about Lily, about the promises he had made to protect her from the instability that had marked his own childhood. He thought about the professional implications, the whispers that would become shouts, the assumptions that would harden into certainty. He thought about all the reasons this was a complicated idea, the different worlds they came from, the careful walls he had built to keep his heart safe. And then he looked at Vivien, at the vulnerability she had allowed him to see, at the genuine connection they had built despite every obstacle. And he made a choice. "I'd like that," he said. "I'd like that very much." The weeks that followed unfolded like the opening chapters of a story neither of them had expected to write. They moved carefully, aware of the scrutiny that would intensify once their relationship became public knowledge. Dinners together became more frequent, always including Lily, who had apparently decided that Vivien was a permanent fixture in their lives worth celebrating. They talked about everything and nothing, sharing histories and hopes across kitchen tables and park benches and quiet evenings on Malik's small balcony. He learned that Vivien had inherited her mother's stubbornness and her father's vision, that she collected rare books and secretly wrote poetry she had never shown anyone, that she was terrified of heights but loved airplanes because the fear felt different when you were going somewhere. She learned that Malik had wanted to be an architect as a child, that he still sketched buildings sometimes when Lily was asleep and the apartment was quiet, that he had a tenor voice he rarely used except for lullabies. She learned about the grandmother who had raised him after his own parents proved unequal to the task, about the sacrifices that had shaped him, about the dreams he had carefully packed away in boxes labeled someday and probably never. They learned each other in the way people do when they have decided to stop protecting themselves from the possibility of being known. It was terrifying and exhilarating and utterly unlike anything Malik had experienced before. One Saturday afternoon, Vivien took Malik and Lily to the botanical gardens, a place Lily had wanted to visit ever since seeing pictures in a library book. They wandered through greenhouses filled with orchids and ferns, past ponds dotted with water lilies, under canopies of flowering trees that made Lily gasp with delight. "Daddy, look!" she kept shouting, pointing at each new wonder as if she had discovered something no one had ever seen before. "Daddy, come see." Malik watched his daughter explore this small paradise, her brown skin glowing in the dappled sunlight, her joy so pure and complete that it made his chest ache with love. And he watched Vivien watching Lily, saw the tenderness in her expression, the way her face softened into something unguarded and open. "Thank you," he said quietly, falling into step beside her while Lily ran ahead to examine a butterfly. "For what?" "For this. For all of it." He gestured vaguely, trying to encompass not just the gardens, but everything that had led them here. "For seeing me, for being willing to open doors I didn't even know existed." Vivien took his hand, interlacing her pale fingers with his darker ones in a gesture that felt both simple and profound. "You opened the first door," she reminded him. "I just decided to invite you in." They stood together beneath a flowering magnolia, watching Lily chase butterflies through patches of sunlight, and Malik felt something he had not allowed himself to feel in years. Hope, not the cautious, contingent hope of someone bracing for disappointment, but the genuine, vulnerable hope of someone who had decided to believe that good things were possible. The summer stretched ahead of them like a promise, full of possibilities neither had dared to imagine 6 months ago. There would be challenges ahead, conversations to navigate, assumptions to overcome. The world had not suddenly become easier for a black single father dating the white CEO of his company, and they would both face judgments from people who questioned their choices, but they would face it together, which made all the difference. On the drive home from the gardens, Lily fell asleep in the back seat, exhausted by an afternoon of botanical exploration. Malik sat in the passenger seat, watching the city slide past, feeling Vivien's presence beside him like an anchor in waters that had been turbulent for so long. "My lease is up in 2 months," he said, the words emerging from a place of tentative hope. "I've been thinking about looking for somewhere bigger, maybe with a yard." Vivien glanced at him, a smile playing at her lips. "That sounds nice." "Lily mentioned something about wanting a garden." "She mentions a lot of things," Malik said, smiling back. "But yeah, she'd love a garden, a place where her grandmother could come visit and plant flowers, a room where she could spread out her art supplies without taking over the kitchen table." "That sounds like a beautiful dream," Vivien said. "It's feeling less like a dream lately," Malik admitted, "more like something that might actually happen." They drove in comfortable silence for a while, the Atlanta suburbs giving way to the city proper, lights beginning to twinkle in the gathering dusk. Malik thought about all the doors he had walked through to reach this moment, the wrong turns that had led to right places, the mistakes that had become opportunities, the accident that had changed everything. "I'm glad I opened that door," he said finally, even though it was the wrong one. Vivien reached across the center console and took his hand again. "It was exactly the right one," she said. "We just didn't know it yet." And as the city lights painted patterns on the windshield, as Lily slept peacefully in the back seat, dreaming of butterflies and gardens, as the future stretched before them like a road newly cleared of obstacles, Malik allowed himself to believe that maybe sometimes the universe knew exactly what it was doing when it sent you stumbling through the wrong door into the right life.